A desperate signal. Alex Rider sat alone in the cockpit of his small cargo ship, the Venture, staring at the endless stretch of stars. He had been drifting through the outer edges of the galaxy for weeks on a routine scavenging mission, looking for scraps to sell. The quiet of deep space had become his constant companion. But tonight, something felt different. The silence was heavier, like the universe itself was holding its breath. The hum of his ship's engines was the only sound, but then his console beeped. It was a faint signal, barely noticeable at first. At first, Alex thought it was just background noise, maybe a glitch in the system. But then it repeated. It wasn't random. It was a message, and it was coming from the most unlikely place, a forbidden sector of space, an area known for being dangerous, full of ancient debris, and the wreckage of ships that had disappeared without a trace. His fingers hovered over the controls. The signal was old, fractured, and heavily encrypted, but he could make out a few words. "Save me before they come." Alex's heart skipped a beat. Who was this? What were they saying? And who were they? A deep, uneasy feeling settled in his chest. He had heard stories about the forbidden sectors, the kind of stories that were told in whispers. No one was ever supposed to go there. But Alex wasn't one to back down from a challenge, and if someone needed help, he couldn't ignore it. He ran his fingers over the controls, trying to clean up the signal, but the message remained garbled. There was no immediate danger, not from the signal itself, but that didn't ease the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something about this didn't sit right. It was a trap, or maybe it was a real distress call. What the hell? Alex muttered to himself, already making his decision. He wasn't one to walk away from a potential payday, or from someone who might need saving. Besides, he could use the good deed. He had always been the type to get involved when others wouldn't. With a quick adjustment to the navigation system, Alex set the course for the coordinates hidden in the broken signal. He pushed the ship's throttle forward, feeling the faint pull of the engines as the Venture hummed to life. His eyes stayed glued to the console, scanning for any signs of danger. As he neared the sector, the stars became fewer, scattered across the black void like distant candles. The space around him grew eerily silent, the sort of silence that made Alex feel even smaller than he already did. There was no turning back now. Minutes later, his ship dropped out of the warp drive, and the coordinates led him to a massive debris field, a graveyard of ships, large and small, floating lifelessly in the cold. Some of the wrecks had been here for centuries, others for only a few years, but they all shared the same tragic fate. Destroyed, lost, abandoned. This is insane, Alex muttered under his breath. The debris field stretched out in all directions, and the closer he got, the more unsettled he felt. Something was off about this place. It was as if it had its own kind of gravity, pulling you in and not letting go. Then he saw it, a small escape pod drifting among the debris, with faint lights flickering from inside. His heart raced. It wasn't just any pod. This one was different. It was newer, and its signal was stronger, more urgent. Alex's instincts kicked in. This was the source of the distress signal. He moved quickly, using his ship's tractor beam to pull the pod toward him. Inside, he saw the shape of a person, barely visible through the cracked windows, unconscious and slumped against the walls of the pod. There was a strange glow coming from within the pod, an unnatural light that seemed to shimmer in the darkness. "Hey, you okay?" Alex called, his voice cutting through the tense silence. He moved to open the hatch of the pod. As soon as the door slid open, the light from within the pod flickered out, and the figure inside stirred. The woman's eyes slowly opened, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. She was clearly alien. Her skin shimmered with an almost silver sheen, and her long dark hair flowed around her like it had a life of its own. She wasn't human. She gasped, her breathing shallow, but her gaze locked onto Alex. For a moment, neither of them moved. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, broken, as if it was a struggle just to get the words out. "Save me, before they come." Her words sent a chill down Alex's spine. His fingers tightened around the controls as he pulled her from the pod and into his ship, laying her gently on one of the chairs. She was fragile, barely conscious, but there was something about her presence that felt important, like the entire universe was watching, waiting. He stared at her, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't some random person. This wasn't a simple rescue mission. "Who are you?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But before she could respond, her body went limp and her eyes closed once more. A sense of urgency flooded Alex's mind. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. But as he looked out the viewports, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was already hunting them. He didn't know who or what it was, but one thing was clear: it was coming. And Alex was now caught in something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The strange passenger. The dimly lit cabin of the Venture was silent, save for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Alex Rider paced nervously, glancing back at the unconscious alien woman lying on the medical cot. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly under the cabin lights, like liquid silver, and her hair, dark and impossibly smooth, fell across her shoulders with an ethereal grace. Who was she? And more importantly, who or what was chasing her? Alex rubbed the back of his neck, glancing out the viewport into the debris field. The hulks of dead ships floated lifelessly around his vessel, casting long shadows against the backdrop of distant stars. His instincts screamed that this place was a trap, but his curiosity, and now responsibility, kept him grounded. The woman stirred, her glowing eyes fluttering open. Alex froze, unsure of what to expect. She blinked a few times, disoriented, before her gaze locked onto him. There was fear in her expression, but also something deeper: relief. "You're human," she whispered, her voice hoarse but melodic, carrying a strange accent that Alex couldn't place. "Yeah, last I checked," Alex replied, trying to keep his tone light, though his pulse quickened. "You're safe now. You're on my ship. Who are you? And what's going on?" She tried to sit up, but winced, clutching her side. Alex noticed faint burns along her arms and torso, the marks of someone who had been through hell. He moved closer, his caution mingled with concern. "Easy," he said, holding out his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're hurt. You need rest." "No time," she said, her voice urgent. "They'll come. They always do." Alex's stomach twisted. Who's they? The people who sent that distress signal? Or someone else? Her gaze darkened. The Zeltra. Alex stiffened. The name was enough to send chills through anyone who had spent time in the galaxy's less-than-friendly sectors. The Zeltra were infamous, an empire of brutal conquerors who left nothing but ruin in their wake. Entire colonies had been wiped out under their iron rule, their survivors scattered or enslaved. "You're saying the Zeltra are after you?" Alex asked, his voice quieter now, as if saying their name aloud might summon them. She nodded weakly. "They're hunting me. If they catch me, it will mean the end." "The end of what?" Alex pressed, her glowing eyes locked onto his. "Not just me. Everything." The cryptic answer did little to calm Alex's nerves. He crossed his arms, pacing again as he tried to piece together the situation. Whoever she was clearly important. Too important for him to ignore. But the Zeltra, that was a whole other level of danger. He wasn't equipped to deal with them. He was just a scavenger with a patched-up ship and a knack for trouble. "Look," Alex said finally, turning back to her. "I'm just a guy with a ship, okay? I'm not a soldier or a hero or whatever it is you think I am. If the Zeltra are after you, I don't know how long I can keep us safe." The woman's expression softened, though her fear remained. "You already saved me," she said. That makes you a hero, whether you believe it or not. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was not what he'd signed up for. But as he looked at her, vulnerable, yet somehow unyielding, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him. "Lissar," she said finally. "My name is Lissar." "Okay, Lissar," Alex said, his tone softening. "Rest. I'll figure something out." But as he turned to leave, the proximity alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the cockpit, and Alex's heart sank. He rushed to the controls, his stomach tightening as he saw the scanner display. A ship had entered the debris field, a massive warship, bristling with weapons and flying the unmistakable black and gold emblem of the Zeltra Empire. "Great," Alex muttered. "Just great." Lissar appeared behind him, leaning on the wall for support. She didn't need to see the display to know what was happening. "They found us," she said, her voice trembling. Alex's hands flew across the controls as he brought the Venture to life. "We're not sticking around to say hi," he said, pulling the ship into a sharp turn. "Hold on." The engines roared as the ship surged forward, weaving through the dense field of wreckage. Behind them, the Zeltra warship gave chase, its weapon systems already locking on. Lissar gripped the back of Alex's chair, her knuckles white. "You don't understand," she said. "They won't stop. They never stop." "Yeah, well, neither do I." Alex shot back, his jaw tight. "Let's see if they can keep up." The first barrage of plasma fire erupted from the warship, narrowly missing the Venture as Alex swerved through a cluster of broken freighters. The Zeltra ship was larger and more heavily armed, but Alex had one advantage: speed. His smaller vessel could maneuver through the debris field in ways the warship couldn't. But speed wouldn't save them forever. "Lissar," Alex said through gritted teeth, "if you've got any bright ideas, now's the time." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, with a determination that surprised even herself, she said, "Get us to a safe distance, and I'll show you." Alex didn't have time to argue. He focused on flying, pushing his ship to its limits as the Zeltra closed in. The stakes had never been higher, and he was beginning to realize that his decision to answer that distress signal had changed his life forever. And this was only the beginning. A hunter on their trail. Alex's fingers gripped the controls so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded in his chest as he twisted and turned the Venture, dodging chunks of broken ships and floating debris. His mind raced, trying to anticipate the next move of the Zeltra warship behind them. It was massive, far larger than anything he'd ever encountered. And the sensors confirmed what he feared. They were being tracked. Lissar, still gripping the back of his chair, had gone quiet. Alex could feel her eyes on him. And though she had said little since they started running, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. It was like she knew something that Alex didn't. A truth that made the Zeltra pursuit feel even more dangerous than it already was. As he weaved through the wreckage, Alex glanced at the redouts. They were moving fast, but the Venture was no match for the firepower the Zeltra warship carried. He had minutes at best before they'd be within weapons range. "Lissar," Alex called, his voice rising above the hum of the ship's engines. "You said you could help. What do we do now?" Lissar didn't answer immediately. She was staring out of the viewport, her glowing eyes fixed on the distant ship. Her face was tense, her lips pressed together in concentration. Alex could sense that whatever she was about to do, it wasn't going to be easy. "Hold on," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She reached for the side panel near her and quickly began pressing buttons, her hands moving with practiced ease. Alex watched her, confusion swirling in his mind. "What are you doing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The ship lurched as a burst of plasma fire from the Zeltra warship narrowly missed them. It wasn't enough to destroy them, but it was a reminder of how much danger they were in. Lissar didn't look away from the console, her brow furrowed in focus. I'm activating the ship's cloaking device, she said. We need to get out of their line of sight if we're going to survive. Alex's eyes widened. Cloaking device? What are you? Trust me, she interrupted, her voice sharp. I don't have time to explain everything. You need to fly steady and keep us hidden. With that, Lisser pressed a final sequence of buttons. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if the Venture had simply disappeared, the stars outside the cockpit faded. The warship behind them seemed to slow, its sensors no longer detecting their ship. The entire world around Alex turned to nothing but a quiet, eerie stillness. His breath caught in his throat. The cloaking device worked, but Alex knew it wouldn't last long. The Zeltra were experts at hunting, and if they couldn't see them on their scanners, they'd simply have to find another way. This won't hold for long, Lisser said, her voice tense. The Zeltra will adapt. We need to get to a place where we can hide, a place they can't follow us. Alex nodded grimly. He could feel the adrenaline pulsing through him. Where? Where can we hide? There's a system, she replied quickly, her fingers already working on the nav console. An uncharted system. No one knows about it. It's the only place we can go to outrun them. Alex glanced at her, a growing unease settling in his chest. Uncharted system. What kind of place was this? How do you know about it? I know because I've been there, she said, her voice hard. It's not just a hiding spot, it's a refuge. But we have to hurry. As the ship coasted through the empty blackness, Alex couldn't help but wonder what kind of refuge Lisser was talking about. The mystery deepened with every word she said. He didn't have time to question it now. They needed to escape, and as the warship began to adjust its course, scanning the debris field again, Alex felt the pressure mount. We're too close, he muttered to himself. The Venture wasn't equipped for this kind of fight, not against a ship that big. He had no weapons, only a handful of escape routes he could try if things got ugly. Then, the cockpit lights flickered. The sensors let out a shrill warning. Enemy lock-on. Alex's pulse spiked. He threw the throttle forward, and the Venture jolted into a sharp turn, dodging another stream of plasma fire. His hands moved instinctively, switching between evasive maneuvers as the Zeltra ship continued to close the distance. They were closing in. He couldn't outrun them forever. Lisser, now would be a good time to start explaining, Alex said, his voice tight. What's so special about this refuge? She turned to him, her eyes serious. It's not just a place to hide. It's a place where people like me are safe. People who the Zeltra want to erase. It's a place where we can fight back. Alex blinked. You're telling me we're going to some kind of rebel base? Not exactly, she replied, her voice low. It's something bigger. It's where I can regroup, where I can build an army. An army? Alex echoed. I'm just trying to survive here. You're telling me you're planning to start a war? Lisser's gaze turned cold, her tone fierce. The Zeltra have been hunting us for years. They'll never stop. If I don't fight back now, they'll destroy everything. Starting with you, starting with Earth. If we don't stop them, there will be no place left to hide. Alex's mind raced. He had never asked for any of this. He was just a scavenger, a guy who kept his head down and stayed out of the galaxy's bigger problems. But now, he was tangled up in something far bigger than himself. And as the Zeltra warship closed in on them once again, Alex had to make a choice. Keep running and hope for the best, or take the plunge and help Lisser, maybe even become part of something that could change the course of history. There was no turning back now. Whatever came next, they were in it together. Okay, Alex said, his voice firm. Let's get to this place. Lead the way. Lisser nodded, a hint of something like relief crossing her face. Hold on. It's going to be a bumpy ride. With that, Alex locked his gaze on the dark space ahead, the danger closing in from behind. Whatever was waiting for them on the other side of the galaxy, he was ready to face it. The Queen's secret. The stars outside the Venture streaked into long lines as Alex pushed the ship's engines to their limits. His hands gripped the controls, sweat beading on his forehead as the Zultra warship followed them like a shadow. They had entered the system that Lissar had mentioned, but the danger wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Lissar sat beside him, her gaze focused, her posture tense. Despite the chaos around them, there was a sense of purpose in her eyes now, something Alex hadn't seen before. She wasn't just some woman he had rescued from an escape pod anymore. The more he learned about her, the more he realized that her story wasn't one of simple survival. "What's this place?" Alex asked, his voice low as he glanced at the redouts. He could feel his ship shuddering under the strain, pushing towards the unknown. He had to know what they were racing towards. "You said it was a refuge, but it feels like we're still running." Lissar's eyes flicked over to him, her expression unreadable. She didn't answer right away, instead staring out at the black expanse, her thoughts clearly far away. It wasn't until the ship dropped out of warp into a quiet corner of the galaxy, far from the Zultra warship, that she spoke again. "It's not just a refuge," she said softly, her voice quieter than usual. "It's my home." Alex blinked, surprised by her words. "Your home," he repeated. "You mean this is where you came from?" Lissar nodded, but there was no joy in her expression. In fact, there was a hint of sadness. "Yes, it was, until it was taken from me." Alex turned in his seat, his curiosity piqued. "Taken from you? What do you mean? What happened?" She hesitated for a moment. Then her voice cracked slightly, as though the memories she was about to share were painful. "I was born into a family that ruled a kingdom, one that stood against the Zultra Empire. For years we fought them off, but they were relentless. My family, my people, we were their greatest enemies. And in the end, they destroyed us." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Alex's mind raced as he tried to process the weight of her revelation. "So, you're telling me, you were a princess?" Lissar's gaze softened, but there was no smile. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was the heir to a throne, one that once united many worlds in defiance of the Zultra. But my family is gone now. The empire they built is nothing but ashes. And I—" She looked down at her hands, as if she couldn't bear to look at him. "I am all that remains." Alex didn't know what to say. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. He had known that Lissar was important, special, even, but he had no idea just how deeply her past ran. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. "I didn't ask for any of this," Lissar continued, her voice steadying, though the pain was still evident in her words. "But I was chosen to lead, chosen to rebuild what the Zultra destroyed." She met his eyes then, her expression fierce. "The Zultra aren't just a threat to me. They're a threat to the entire galaxy. And they have to be stopped. They can't be allowed to continue their reign of terror." Alex's mind buzzed with this new information. He was no longer just helping a stranger. He was aiding the last surviving member of a royal bloodline, a woman who carried the weight of an entire fallen empire on her shoulders. But it wasn't just the past he needed to think about anymore. It was the future. "You're telling me you want to rebuild your kingdom," Alex said slowly. "But how? You don't have an army, and the Zultra are everywhere." Lissar's lips tightened into a thin line. "I may not have an army right now," she said, her tone cold and resolute, "but I have something far more important." Alex frowned, trying to understand. What could be more important than an army? She turned her gaze back to the viewport, her eyes softening as she looked at the distant stars. "I have the knowledge, the technology, the resources to fight back." She paused, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "The Zultra think they have wiped us out, but they're wrong. They don't know everything. I have a secret weapon, one that can turn the tide of the war." Alex's head spun. A secret weapon? What kind of weapon? Lissar's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Not a weapon in the way you think," she said. "It's something much more powerful. Something I've inherited from my ancestors." Before Alex could ask more questions, the ship's sensors pinged, pulling his attention back to the immediate threat. "We're almost there," Alex said, his fingers flying over the controls. "But I don't think we're alone." Lissar's face grew serious again. She stood, her posture rigid. "I know. The Zeltra are close. But we can't stop now." "Are you sure about this?" Alex asked, his voice strained. "I mean, this place, this secret weapon, it's really going to help us? Because I've seen a lot of things out here in space, and I've never met anyone who had what they said they had." Lissar's eyes burned with a quiet intensity. "You'll see soon enough. This is bigger than both of us. We are the last hope for the galaxy. We can't afford to fail." Her words hit Alex harder than any plasma blast ever could. He had signed up for a simple scavenger's life, and now here he was, chasing down a former princess who carried the fate of the galaxy in her hands. His mind spun with the implications of it all. A secret weapon, a lost kingdom, an unstoppable empire. It was a lot to take in. But in that moment, looking at Lissar, Alex realized that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far bigger. It was about a future. And maybe, just maybe, he was part of it. As they approached the uncharted system, Alex took a deep breath. The journey ahead would be dangerous, full of unknowns. But one thing was certain: Lissar wasn't just any fugitive. She was the last hope of a broken empire. And somehow, she had made him part of her fight. "Let's get this over with," Alex muttered to himself as he guided the ship towards the coordinates Lissar had given him. "We've got a war to win. Humanity's gamble." The stars outside the Venture blurred into streaks as Alex pushed the ship into warp, the hum of the engines vibrating through the hull. His mind raced, the weight of Lissar's revelation still heavy on his shoulders. He was no longer just a simple scavenger. He was part of something monumental, something that could change the course of the galaxy's future. And yet, as he navigated through the empty expanse, the Zeltra warship still loomed behind them, a shadow that never seemed to fade. Lissar had said they were headed to the refuge, a place that could provide sanctuary. But even she couldn't mask the underlying sense of urgency it was building inside him. The Zeltra were relentless. How long before they found them? How long before the galaxy, with all its vastness, became too small to hide in? Lissar's silence in the cockpit only added to his unease. She sat across from him, her gaze distant, her fingers lightly touching the edge of her seat, as if she were bracing for something. Alex could feel her thoughts, heavy and guarded. She was thinking about the future she was supposed to rebuild. It was hard for him to imagine the weight of that responsibility, let alone carry it. "Where exactly are we going?" Alex asked after a long stretch of silence. He could no longer hold back the questions that had been swirling in his head since the moment she had shared her past. "I mean, what's this place that you keep talking about?" Lissar looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. "It's called Serath. It's not just a hideout. It's a hidden system, far away from the Zeltra. My people created it as a last bastion. It's been protected for centuries. No one has been able to find it. Until now." Alex frowned, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Your people built it, but if it's hidden, how do you know about it?" "My ancestors," she said quietly, her gaze shifting to the viewports, where the stars stretched into an endless sea. "They created it, knowing that one day the Zeltra would come for us. They foresaw the Empire's rise, and they prepared in secret. Serath was never meant to be discovered until it was time to fight back." Alex let out a slow breath. "So this is it, the last refuge. The place where you can rally whatever's left of your people, build an army, and fight back." Lissar nodded. "It's more than that," she said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of an ancient responsibility. "The Zeltra believed they destroyed us. They believe we are weak, scattered, and forgotten. But they are wrong. I will prove that. Alex looked at her, torn between admiration and disbelief. She spoke with the conviction of someone who had spent her life preparing for this moment. But how could she take on this Ultra, a galactic empire that had crushed entire civilizations? How could anyone stand against them? Before he could voice his doubts, the console beeped, a sharp warning. Alex's heart skipped a beat as the readouts flashed red. "They're here," Lissar said, her voice calm despite the danger. "We've reached the system, but it's not enough to just arrive. We have to secure the coordinates. The Zeltra will have already sent scouts to search for us." Alex's grip tightened on the controls. He couldn't believe it. They were so close to their destination, yet so far from safety. A new wave of tension surged through him. If they didn't act fast, the Zeltra would be waiting for them when they arrived. There was no room for error. "How do we land there?" Alex asked, his fingers hovering over the navigation panel. "How do we make sure we're not followed?" Lissar stood, her eyes narrowing as she studied the displays. "The system is vast, but it's also treacherous," she said. "We'll have to fly through a series of gravitational anomalies that hide the planet's coordinates. The Zeltra won't be able to track us through the disturbances, but if we get caught in one of the fields, we could be stuck for hours, maybe days." Alex glanced at her. "So it's a gamble," he muttered, though he didn't need her to confirm it. He already knew. "Yes," Lissar said softly, "but it's a gamble we must take. It's the only way." Before Alex could respond, another alert popped up on the screen. This time, it wasn't just the Zeltra warship closing in. It was more. A fleet. Several ships, smaller than the warship, but still formidable. They had picked up their trail. "We don't have time for this," Alex said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to move now." Lissar moved to the console, inputting a series of commands. "Hold on tight," she said. "This is going to be rough." She activated the ship's emergency thrusters, and the Venture shot forward into the darkness of the Sereth system. The gravitational anomalies loomed ahead like twisted fingers reaching for them, and Alex's gut clenched. The sense of being hunted was overwhelming. His mind raced, calculating the risks, but there was no time for second thoughts. They had to get through. The ship lurched as they entered the first anomaly, the sudden shift in gravity pushing Alex back into his seat. The sensors screamed warnings as the ship was pulled in every direction. But Alex fought against it, turning the controls to keep them steady. Every second counted now. The Zeltra ships were still behind them, relentless. But in the chaos of the anomalies, they lost their tracking lock for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Alex exhaled sharply, his pulse racing. "We've got a shot," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Lissar glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "Not yet. We have to get through the second field. It's even more dangerous." They plunged deeper into the swirling mess of gravity wells and space-time distortions. Each pulse of the anomaly pushed them further off course, and Alex had to rely on his instincts to keep them from crashing into one of the nearby asteroids. The tension in the cockpit was suffocating. Lissar said nothing, but her eyes never left the readings on the panel. Alex could feel her focus, her determination. This wasn't just about saving her. This was about something much larger, a fight for the future of the galaxy. And Alex was right in the middle of it, whether he liked it or not. The ship shuddered again, the anomalies throwing them into another sharp turn. The Zeltra fleet was still close behind. They were running out of time. "We're almost there," Lissar said, her voice tight. "Just a few more seconds." The gravitational pull increased, but this time, Alex didn't fight it. Instead, he used the distortion to his advantage, pulling the Venture into a sharp dive that took them beneath the Zeltra's sensors. "Now," Lissar shouted. Alex hit the final control, and with a deafening roar, the ship shot through the final anomaly, straight into the hidden system. The gravitational disturbances fell away, and the stars around them settled into a peaceful, silent calm. They had made it. For a moment, the cockpit was silent. Alex exhaled in relief, his muscles sore from the strain. But there was no time to relax. The Zeltra weren't far behind, and they wouldn't give up so easily. But for now, they were safe, and for the first time since he'd met Lissar, Alex felt the smallest glimmer of hope, a hero's choice. The silence inside the Venture was almost suffocating, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the chaos they had just escaped. The harsh hum of the ship's engines was the only sound as Alex and Lissar sat in the cockpit, staring out at the uncharted system they had just entered. For a moment, Alex allowed himself to breathe, but the relief was short-lived. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. Behind them, the Zeltra fleet might have been forced to retreat momentarily, but Alex knew they wouldn't give up so easily. The warships had their methods of tracking, and their relentless pursuit was something Alex was beginning to understand all too well. If they couldn't find the refuge, they would simply keep searching, tearing the galaxy apart until they did. The weight of their escape settled into Alex's bones. He had never imagined his life would take such a turn, fighting off galactic empires and racing across the stars, carrying a fugitive royal with the fate of the universe on her shoulders. The more he learned about Lissar, the more he realized she wasn't just some random survivor. She was the last hope for a galaxy teetering on the edge of destruction. But as they sat in the relative calm of the unknown system, a thought began to gnaw at the back of Alex's mind. What happens now? Lissar had already begun to study the star maps, plotting their course towards Sirith, the hidden refuge that was supposed to be their sanctuary. But Alex couldn't ignore the questions that were beginning to rise within him. Lissar, Alex said, his voice cutting through the stillness. You've told me a lot about your past, about your people, about the Zeltra. But there's one thing I don't understand. She didn't look up from the console, but Alex could feel her attention shift to him. What is it? She asked, her voice steady, but tinged with the weight of her responsibilities. You want to rebuild your kingdom. Alex continued, his eyes focused on the star map, though his mind was far from the navigation. But how? You have no army, no resources. You said yourself the Zeltra think you're gone. How can we fight them when they have the power of an entire empire behind them? Lissar's hands stilled on the console, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate. Then, her voice was soft, almost reflective. You think it's impossible, don't you? Alex didn't answer immediately. His mind was running through the possibilities, trying to piece together a way out of this. He had fought in skirmishes, handled dangerous situations, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The Zeltra weren't just another enemy to be dealt with. They were an empire, a machine that destroyed everything in its path. What could a single woman, even one as determined as Lissar, do against that? I don't know, Alex admitted, finally turning his gaze toward her. But I do know one thing. If we stay here, we'll never be able to rebuild anything. The Zeltra will find us, and then we're both done. Lissar met his eyes, her expression firm. I know, but I can't hide forever. I've spent my life running from them, and I refuse to continue that way. This is my chance to take back what was lost, to rally the people who still believe in the cause. But I need you, Alex. I need your help. Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a choice that would affect not just his life, but the fate of the galaxy. He had never wanted to be a hero. He had always been the type of guy who kept his head down, who took the easy jobs, stayed out of the bigger fights. But somewhere along the way, that had changed. Somewhere along the way, he had become more than just a scavenger. He had become a part of something larger than himself. Why me? He asked, his voice low, searching for answers. Why pick me to help you? I'm just a guy with a ship. I don't have any special skills, no army, no knowledge of war. Lissar's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her voice quiet but full of conviction. Because you made a choice. When you found me, you could have walked away. You didn't. You risked everything for someone you didn't even know. That's why I need you. You're more than just a pilot, Alex. You're someone who sees when there's more at stake than just yourself. Alex swallowed hard. His thoughts swirled, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something far larger, something that could save the lives of millions. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, and for a moment, Alex questioned his ability to carry it. But what happens when we're outnumbered? Alex asked, his voice shaking slightly with the gravity of the situation. What happens when we face the Zultra head-on, and we don't have enough to fight them off? I can't lead an army, Lissar. I don't know how. You don't have to lead an army, she said gently. But you can be the spark. You can be the one who shows people that there's hope. That one person can make a difference. Her words echoed in Alex's mind, and for the first time, he understood something deep inside himself. He had never been the kind of person to stand up for something larger than himself. But now, as the possibility of a galaxy at war hung in the balance, he realized that perhaps that was the very reason he had been chosen to help her. You're asking me to gamble everything, Alex said, his voice hoarse. You want me to throw everything away for a cause I barely understand. How can I just walk away from everything I know? Lissar's gaze didn't waver, because sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing. And sometimes the only way forward is to make a choice, no matter how uncertain the outcome. Alex took a deep breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about surviving or getting out of this alive. This was about fighting for a future, about standing against something far greater than anything he could have ever imagined. As he looked at Lissar, he realized that this was his moment. This was his choice. Okay, Alex said, his voice steadying. Let's do this. Let's fight back. Lissar's eyes lit up with something akin to relief and gratitude, but she didn't smile. Not yet. There was still too much at stake. But Alex knew, in that moment, that their fight was far from over. They weren't just running from the Zultra anymore. They were going to make a stand. Rise of the Queen. The stars were silent, cold, as the venture cut through the darkness toward their final destination. Serath. It was no longer just a name. It was a promise, a refuge, and the final hope for a galaxy at war. Alex had made his choice. There was no turning back now. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a part of something larger than himself, something he could barely grasp. Lissar sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the viewport, but there was a new energy in her, a fire that had burned brighter ever since Alex had pledged to help her. She had always carried the weight of her people's legacy, but now, with his support, it felt like something even more tangible. This was no longer just about survival. This was about reclaiming what was lost. It was about making sure the Zultra didn't win. How much further? Alex asked, his voice breaking the quiet. Lissar glanced at the star map, then back to him. Not far. We're almost there. We just have to pass through the last set of gravity wells. Once we're past them, Serath will be right ahead. Alex nodded, though his mind was far from the navigation. His thoughts kept drifting to the future. What would it look like after this? If they succeeded, if they were able to rally the people and build an army, what would the fight against the Zultra look like? He had no idea. But one thing was certain. He would be right there with Lissar, whatever came next. The ship lurched suddenly, throwing both of them forward. The console beeped erratically as alarms blared. Alex's heart raced as he quickly regained control. Not now, he muttered under his breath, his fingers flying over the controls. He quickly scanned the system, trying to find the cause of the disturbance. It wasn't just a random glitch. Zultra, Lissar said, her voice calm despite the situation. They found us. Alex cursed, his mind instantly on the defensive. How had they tracked them so quickly? He'd thought they had a lead. How were the Zeltra so good at this? They must have used the gravitational anomalies to pinpoint our location. Lissar continued, her eyes narrowing as she stood, moving toward the console. They know we're headed to Sereth. Alex's pulse quickened. What do we do now? Lissar looked at him, her eyes steely with resolve. We don't run anymore. We fight. Alex didn't have time to process the weight of her words. The Zeltra were closing in fast, their ships visible on the radar, their weapons powering up. They had no time to escape, no time to think. Without hesitation, Alex set the ship's thrusters to full power, pushing them into a high-speed turn. The ship jolted under the strain, but he didn't let up. He was committed now. There was no turning back. Behind them, the Zeltra ships followed in hot pursuit. The first burst of plasma fire exploded near their starboard side, sending a shockwave through the ship. Alex's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his focus. This wasn't just about flying anymore. This was about buying time, creating enough chaos to give them a chance to reach Sereth. Hold on. Alex gritted through clenched teeth, maneuvering the ship in a desperate bid to stay ahead. We're not going down without a fight. Lissar's hand moved to the weapons console, her fingers flying across the controls as she activated the ship's automated defenses. The turret mounted on the Venture erupted in a barrage of fire, striking one of the Zeltra ships dead center. It wasn't enough to destroy them, but it was enough to cause them to veer off course, giving them a momentary edge. Nice shot, Alex muttered, his voice filled with grim determination. He had seen his fair share of dogfights, but this felt different. This was personal now. They were fighting for a future. We need to keep them off our tail, Lissar said, her voice focused, without a hint of fear. We can't afford to stop. Alex nodded, not looking away from the controls as he pulled the Venture into a dangerous spiral, evading another volley of shots. His hands were slick with sweat, his nerves taut, but the thought of what was at stake pushed him forward. They flew through the asteroid field, dodging debris and rocks, using the terrain to their advantage. The Zeltra warships followed, but their larger size made it harder for them to keep up in such a cluttered environment. Still, they were relentless. The air was thick with the tension of battle as Alex and Lissar fought together, each move a step closer to their goal. Minutes passed, and the battle raged on. Every time Alex thought they might escape, another Zeltra ship would fire, or another would come into range. The odds were stacking against them, but Lissar was right. This wasn't about running anymore. They were making their stand. Ahead, the gravitational pull of Sereth was becoming more pronounced, but they weren't there yet. The Zeltra were closing in again. This was it, the moment where everything would be decided. Lissar. Alex shouted, urgency in his voice. We need to buy more time. Lissar's eyes locked onto the tactical display, her mind racing. We can't outrun them much longer. We need to hit them harder. Her fingers danced over the console, and Alex felt the ship's engines roar as she activated a series of advanced systems, ones that Alex had only vaguely heard about. The ship hummed with a new, unfamiliar energy. Suddenly, the Venture surged forward, breaking the pull of gravity just as another round of Zeltra fire hit the rear shields. But they didn't stop. The ship jolted forward, using a hidden burst of speed that Alex didn't even know it was capable of. They flew through the remaining asteroid fields, the path ahead now clear. Ahead of them, the destination, the heart of Sereth, was coming into view. The Zeltra warships hesitated for just a moment, unsure of the sudden burst of speed. But it was enough. Alex could see the swirling gravitational pull of Sereth's moons, the final refuge of Lissar's people. It was the haven they had been fighting for. Almost there, Lissar whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The Zeltra were still in pursuit, but their chances of catching them were dwindling. The anomaly surrounding Sereth was not just a hiding spot, it was a weapon. It could protect them from the Zeltra, just long enough to get them into orbit. The final push came, and with a crackling roar, the Venture broke free from the last gravitational field, entering Serath's protective boundary. The Zeltra ship slowed, unable to follow. They had arrived. They had made it. As Alex took a breath of relief, he looked over at Lissar. Her eyes were bright with something beyond just triumph. It was the beginning of something new. Her people would rebuild. They would fight back. And the galaxy would soon know that Lissar, the last of her bloodline, had returned to reclaim what was lost. Serath was no longer just a refuge. It was the birthplace of a new hope. The fight was just beginning.